o está quitado. Ya lo que pondremos será pondremos esta. eh, y haremos esto. Así. Sería esto, ¿no? Que- Y tengo que poner... Vamos a traducir al español, del inglés al español. Cuando quieran. A ver, ¿qué pasa entonces? Un momento. Un momento. Sí, voy a hacerlo un momentito. Un momento, Magnus, que voy a hacer que dejes de compartir. Un momentito. Magnus, I'm going to move your presentation just to check something, and we will come back in 1 minute. Eloy, a ver, tenemos esto así. ¿Estás viendo mi pantalla? Uh-huh. No. Aquí, ¿no? Ahí está. ¿Eh? Uh-huh. Sí, voy. Uh-huh.
Dale a aceptar.
Uh-huh.
Y ahora tienes que mover la presentación, o sea, el Google Meet en este escritorio.
Vale.
Y así tienes que ponerlo encima, por decirlo así, de lo que es.
A ver si soy capaz.
A ver si soy capaz.
No me deja, tío.
No me deja.
Púlsalo. Aquí. Pulsa Google Chrome y dale en mí.
Aquí.
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 Ahora está, ¿no?
Ahora ya se ve.
Ahora está, ¿no?
¿Y ahora dejo de compartir o...?
¿Yo lo dejo de compartir o...?
Dejas de compartir, sí.
Y que
Ya
comparta
está, ya
Magnus
puedes.
ahora,
Y
¿no?
que comparta Magnus ahora, ¿no?
Sí, ponlo en pantalla completa, eso sí.
Sí.
Ya está ya.
Magnus,
Magnus,
can you share your screen?
share your screen?
Or your presentation, sorry.
Your presentation.
Let me open it again. Hang on.
Bueno, os pedimos disculpas. We apologize. Now.
Is it working now?
Yes.
We have to check on the YouTube.
Yes, I can see properly on the YouTube. Now.
So we can start.
Okay. Let's do it again. Bueno, buenos días, buenas tardes. Nuevamente les damos la bienvenida a este nuevo formato que le hemos dado a nuestros tradicionales seminarios de GrupoLab, reconvertidos en esta idea del aperitivo. para, bueno, tratar de ofrecer un espacio más coloquial y más distendido para conversar con nuestros invitados e invitadas. Mi nombre es Melissa Campana, formo parte de GrupoLab. Estoy muy contenta de estar moderando esta sesión. Vamos a tener una traducción simultánea del inglés al español, que esperamos funcione bien. Por lo que voy a volver a hacer esta presentación en inglés para aprovechar a insistir en que esta sesión va a ser grabada y va a quedar luego alojada en nuestro canal de YouTube y en la web de GrupoLab. Mi compañero Juan Brea va a estar moderando el chat box de YouTube para que puedan hacer preguntas que luego recogeremos hacia el final. Y cualquier inquietud también pueden colocarla ahí. Va a estar la información sobre nuestras redes sociales también, de manera que puedan seguirnos, etiquetarnos, etcétera, en nuestras redes. Y, por supuesto, agradecerle a nuestro invitado de hoy, a quien voy a pasar a presentar. So, good afternoon. Welcome to a new GrupoLab seminar. I must say that we are very excited to introduce you today to a new format for our meetings. We hope it works well. And this session will be recorded and stored, as you know. We call this new dynamic El Aperitivo to define a kind of roundtable to dialogue with our guests in a more colloquial and accessible way. Let's see what happens. And today our interview is based on a series of topics concerning the salient features of community social work in Germany. As most of you know, social work in Europe is characterized by diversity, and Germany is a particularly interesting example of a European country with a distinct social work profession. Today, we'll discuss some aspects of German social work, theory and practice, which impact on its community work. We'll especially highlight 3 factors. In the first place, Germany's rich social pedagogy traditions, then Germany's unique approach to social space, and finally, Germany's notable theory traditions. The idea is to present a sketch of how those 3 factors have shaped the country's critical and substantial approach to community development. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our guest of today, who is a distinguished academic from the University of Werder, Germany. He's dedicated to the fields of comparative and international social work education. He's also the author of European and International Social Work. And he, of course, is interested in Germany's community approaches to social work. I'm honored to be moderating this session. Please join me in welcoming Professor Magnus Frampton, and thank you to be here with us today.
Thank you so much, Mel, for that lovely introduction. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And it's really fun for me to be part of this experiment. Just so you all know, I can't see the same screen that you're seeing. I'm hoping you're seeing me with Spanish subtitles. Hopefully the subtitles are working okay.
Yes, it's working okay. Everything is working okay.
This is lovely, a fun experiment already. Yeah, shall we start with our questions? Shall we start with our discussion, Mel?
Yes, of course. And, well, I will repeat that you can introduce your questions in the chat box of YouTube. Please do it. And, well, as we discussed, we've been discussing by email these topics with Magnus. And one of the first concerns we have is that, well, you know, I'm from Latin America and several colleagues of my group too. And when we talk in Latin America context about community work, we have in mind a set of ideas and traditions and discussions very particular of that context. So I wonder if, Magnus, if you can tell us which are the main German traditions of community work and what their peculiarities are.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually our big question today, isn't it? How is German social work different from other social works in terms of how it thinks about community? Before I continue, maybe it's fun if I tell you something biographically about myself. I really am a German lecturer. I teach at a German university, but some of you are listening to me and you might be thinking, oh, that isn't a German accent. And if you're thinking that, you're quite right. My accent is a British accent. So I have two nationalities, I have two identities, and I can maybe give you a German answer and a British answer to that question. And the German answer is long, and I think the German answer is going to be our roundtable discussion. It's going to be the next half hour. But the British answer is short, and I can kind of almost give you a spoiler, maybe cover your ears and stop reading the subtitles if you don't want this spoiler. But I'm going to conclude by thinking about how German social work is different with regards to community. And I can already hint now the big difference. In Anglo-Saxon social work, community is often used for the method of community work, for the method of community development. So we see community and social work as something of an add-on in the Anglo-Saxon cultures. And in German social work, it's quite different. Community really is the starting point, it's the basis. Maybe it's the heart of the social work. So it's not just a method, but rather it's part of every piece of social work that we do. So that's the kind of the classic Anglo-Saxon short summary answer. And I have no idea how well it's come out in translation. Let me say a few bits more about this though. Although we're going to talk about the differences today, community work has similar traditions in many countries. And really, if you look at the post-war period, so from the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, at that time, lots of Northern European countries had quite similar community approaches. So this was the time in Northern Europe, the growth of the welfare state, which was very rapid, very fast. We had a focus on things like housing and local services. Now that's what I'm not going to talk about today. What I'm going to talk about today is more recent developments. In particular, I'm going to focus on the recent decades. And there really are distinct community approaches in German social work. And the obvious question is why? You know, where does this come from? Why are they different? Where do these differences come from? It's the classic comparative social work question. And I could talk about this for hours, but I'm going to give you a brief summary now. The German homegrown approach to thinking about community, for me, it reflects different social movements. So the social movements, the grassroots movements in society were a little bit different in Germany. The idea of community in Germany has been different. How do we see the individual in the community, in the society, and their relationship to the state? That's different in every country. And then you've got the idea of social work itself. You know, what is social work? In German, we say soziale Arbeit. Soziale Arbeit, that's the German word, and it's not a one-to-one translation of social work. So that's going to be different, and that's going to have an influence here. And finally, we're going to talk today about social work discourses, especially social work theory discourses. Different countries can have different theories, and that will shape how community as a concept is used in social work. So really, three specific reasons for the differences. You're going to see an example of how community is different in Germany in three particular ways. In a minute, I'm going to talk about the influence of social pedagogy. We're going to talk about this idea of social space. And then at the end, I'll give you an example of a theory specific to Germany. And I'm going to give you supporting literature as well. So if you want to learn more about these, you can read more at your own pleasure. So that's my brief answer to your first question, Mel.
Wonderful. It's a brief, but very consistent one, I think. And I've noticed that you mentioned that the concept of social pedagogy was coined in Germany. Could you tell us if it has made a difference to community approaches?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is another fascinating point in comparative social work. We really have different social professions. And again, the English language discourses have promoted this idea of social work. But that word was not so important in Germany in recent decades, until recent decades. So in the past, Germany had other professions, and social pedagogy has been the big one. This is a different approach to thinking about the social professions in Germany. Now, the term itself is interesting because it's made in Germany. It was a German in 1844 who first talked about the idea of social pedagogy. So a new concept, a new word, that term was coined. Okay, and in the next decades, not so much happened, but by the end of the 19th century, things started to get quite interesting, and we had a bunch of people developing social pedagogy theory. And this discipline, this profession, boomed in the early 20th century, to the extent that you can say that social pedagogy, not social work, that was the dominant social profession. So in a sense, social pedagogy was more important than social work in Germany. Now, the word itself, pedagogy, this is about education. We're having theories of education here. This is about child raising, socialization, how we develop, how we learn. And that really has shaped social work. By an interesting coincidence, this term's boom coincided with important legislation. So an important social law established services in communities. So each municipality would have its own system of children and family services. And the law, you can see the name there in German. I won't say it because it might confuse our translating software. So that's the background. Let me give you an example of one of these social pedagogy thinkers. This gentleman here is Paul Nathorp, and I've got a quite fascinating quote by him. Have a look at this. The human being becomes a human being only due to human community. He adds, the individual human being is actually only an abstraction, like the atom of the physicist. What a fascinating idea. Now, I grew up in Britain in the 1980s. I was a kid, a teenager in the 1980s. And that's when we had that period of Thatcherism politically. So Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister. She famously said, there is no such thing as society, only individuals and families. And Nathorp's saying the exact opposite. You know, this is the opposite of that conservative 1980s perspective. He's saying everything is for community. You are not a human being outside of your community. You're only a human being because of your role in human communities. So it's an utterly fascinating idea. And this is almost like the foundation of social pedagogic theory. So that maybe gives you a feeling of the influence of this early theory. And again, putting it into practice, and I'm going back 100 years now, so we're going to be in the 1920s. We had this law I just mentioned. What we had was a kind of community child welfare and family support system. We had a network of organizations providing local services. So it wasn't just one agency, it was a whole series of agencies working together, integrated into one system. Again, via this law, via this legislation. So we had one whole system with a whole bunch of agencies. Some of these organizations were state organizations, but some were voluntary sector organizations, NGOs or charities. The first anchor of this system was low threshold local child welfare help. So the idea was you could get family counselling very easy near to where you lived. But as a second anchor, we had a whole bunch of community activities, mostly from the voluntary sector. So we had lots of youth work. We had the kindergarten system, childcare. We had community recreation, free time activities, all integrated into this one very broad child welfare system. So as you can see, this is not like, say, the British or the American child welfare system. This is in itself bigger, broader, you might say more holistic, and certainly very much community anchored. So yeah, social pedagogy in theory, but also in practice together with this law, immediately set German social work on a kind of special community path, if you like.
Yes, it's very clear, and I have some additional questions for the end while I'm listening to you. And Magnus, you also mentioned something about the tradition, Germany's tradition of critical social work. Could you say more about this and how it impacts on community approaches too?
Yeah, and again, this is very interesting, and it's something I kind of almost have to talk about when we discussed the things to discuss together in this session, thinking about community from a German perspective. The structure of my presentation kind of created itself. I must talk about critical theory and critical social work. Why? Well, if you think about it, critical theory is also something with German roots. You've got your famous Frankfurt School philosophers going back to, again, the 1930s, that kind of time in Germany. We had a collection of philosophers that were battling out new approaches in philosophy. And the famous paper, of course, many of you guys have read this, I'm sure, Traditional and Critical Theory by Horkheimer, that really set things off. This paper proposed a critical theory, a new idea, to replace the more positivist traditional theory that had preceded. So there's very much a kind of a Marxist idea here. Philosophy should be there to question. Philosophy should be there to bring about social change, to change the world. And you can imagine how social workers really found this an inspiring idea. Now, the influence of this was delayed, but by the 1960s, these ideas were really being picked up by social work and social pedagogy practitioners. Mollenhauer wrote a fascinating book in the 60s with the word emancipation in the title. Today, of course, we talk about liberation, but it's exactly the same idea. So it's a really vibrant movement from that period onwards, from the 1960s onwards. And from this point onwards, social pedagogy theory really has primarily drawn from critical theory. If you ask me which discipline is the closest to social pedagogy, I'd say critical philosophy. That would be the closest discipline without any kind of doubt. How does this work in practice? Again, linking it back to life in everyday society in the 1960s. Social work to support citizens using democratic and participative structures. Those are the two big buzzwords, participation, but also democracy. We wanted to see democracy in action. And this was exciting if you looked at, for example, the user movements at the time, self-help movements, for example, the disabled community helping themselves, and all of the movements related to rights, to citizenship rights and different rights, especially for vulnerable people. So there's a lot of exciting movements in civil society, and social workers were aligning themselves with these movements. In contrast, social workers in the 60s in Germany were quite critical of state institutions. So at the time, youth justice, for example, of a criminal justice system, there would have been quite critical perspectives there. But the solidarity was very much with the movements in civil society.
Wonderful. It's very clear, and I have more and more questions. Additional questions.
It's nice of me to say also, keep typing those questions in. We'll look at some of the ones we like best.
Houston, we have a problem. So going back to the title of this session, you use an expression which is not well known in English language social work, that is social space. Could you elaborate on this? And what does it have to do with community? That is the main topic today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm giving you all of these concepts for us Germans get excited about, and this is the next one, social space. You'll see this word Sozialraum, social space, in German texts everywhere. Germans also talk about a social space orientation. I've just been talking about the 1960s. Now I want to jump forwards to the 1990s. So from about 1990 onwards, this discourse specific to the German-speaking countries, it became really big in social work. It was inspired by social sciences discourses. In particular, lots of ideas from urban geography were filtering into social work, but also, once again, philosophical ideas. And Lefebvre's right to the city, that concept, which was already a couple of decades old, that concept suddenly became quite important. As an orientation. So the idea of having inclusive spaces in our cities, having accessible spaces in our cities, having democratic spaces. And of course, these have been themes in German social work anyway. So a real buzzword or buzz phrase at the time in German from Fall zum Feld. Fall is a word meaning case, and Feld, as you might imagine, Feld means field, or in this case, community. So what we were doing, we were leaving an individual casework approach and instead taking a kind of community approach to look at our work. I cannot stress enough how radical this is. And again, I'm looking at it as a British German. In the UK, social work has almost become reduced to casework or case management. You know, social workers in the UK, a lot of what they're doing really is helping individuals. And Germans were trying to get away from that and almost do the opposite. Take the community, your city neighborhood, your town, take that as the starting point. So this is a whole new approach in social work. It's tied to particular methods. So, for example, people thinking about this developed new methods of supporting community organizations, community planning techniques, you know, promoting democracy in community systems. So you had new methods, you had new theory. I'm going to end my presentation with an example of a social work theory from Germany. You had values and attitudes attached to that. There's a lovely paper by Spacek, which I can really recommend you checking out. It's fairly recent, it's in English, and he's very excited about this approach. He spent lots of his time researching it, writing about it, and he claims this is a paradigm. So he's using that word from Kuhn. This is such a revolution in thinking about our discipline that we can describe this as a paradigm, a new paradigm in thinking about German social work. And he explains it, again, I'm citing him directly here. He says different authors have different perspectives here. So there's not one social space orientation, but maybe a set of slightly different ones. But he says there are commonalities in authors' perspectives. And he reduces these commonalities to a set of 6, which is nice to quote. He says, firstly, this social space orientation, this social work with a social space orientation, is driven by citizens' wishes and interests. So it really starts with the citizen. It starts in town, starts with that community. That's the starting point. He says it's help to self-help. Germans love this idea. And there's strong ties with service user-led organizations. I can give you an example. My kids went to a nursery, like a kindergarten, run by the parents. So it's a kind of citizens action group initiative. You know, back 20 years ago, a bunch of parents got together and created their own nursery. They literally found a room, hired a manager, and simply started running it. And that would be very much the spirit of this movement. So social work tied to self-help movements. It's a strengths-based approach. You can see that in German there. It's an orientation on resources that are already there at the community level. Important in Germany, Germany has a lot of bureaucracy, and this approach tries to break up traditional institutional or bureaucratic responsibilities. Yeah, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility. That's what you're not allowed to say anymore. So it seems to kind of battle the rigid bureaucratic frameworks. it's integrating, it's coordinating, it's networking, local support. Another buzzword of the 90s, and this was something you got in the English-speaking countries too, the idea of joined up services. So, you know, we have a net of services without any gaps in. The last point is very German. We have a lovely German word, which the translation software can't translate. We call it Bildung. And Bildung is a little bit like education or formation. It tries to capture the idea of personal growth, personal development, the idea of me becoming somebody with agency, becoming an actor, being able to determine, self-determine what happens in my life. So there you are, the social space orientation. So Spacek says this is a new paradigm in our social work.
Please say the word again, just to hear it.
Yeah, social space orientation. A new.
No, the German word.
What it is? Sozialraumorientierung.
Love it. I can't speak one word in German. So again, make sure to ask any questions you have by writing them in the YouTube chat box, and I encourage my colleagues here, GrupoLab, to think about some questions. I have several, you know. And before we go to the open Q&A, our last question for Magnus would be, are German social work theories different to the English-speaking countries ones? And if you can name some examples here, we're thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is they're so different. They really are absolutely different. It's fascinating how different they are. And the background is, if you look at these theories, basically Germans since the 1960s, they've been using theories from their own country. So what you'll get is a German language set of theories. So German theories or Austrian theories, exclusive to the region. In other words, my German students wouldn't know many Anglo-Saxon social work theories. You know, they wouldn't necessarily know the concepts, but they would know their own. These German theories often integrate contemporary ideas from the other sciences, you know, so from, for example, from German language philosophy, from German language sociology. If works get translated into German, then of course they can also influence these theories as well. As you might expect, critical theory usually has a very strong influence, and we can also say that the German social pedagogy traditions of the past also inform theories today. The example I'm giving here, and it really is the dominant German social work theory today, is Hans Tiersch's life world orientation for social work. And this is a project he's been working on since the 1970s. That's Hans Tiersch in the photo, by the way, there. And I can say a little bit about this, but first of all, I have to take a step back and talk about the life world. And this is a term which many of you will be familiar with, I'm sure. The life world is a concept from phenomenology. So again, German-speaking philosophy going back to the last century. My life world, my beliefs about myself, the world around me as I perceive it. So it's my world, but as I am experiencing it. Now, the word is used by different philosophers, different thinkers. I think it was coined by Husserl. I've got a book here by, let me see, Schütz and Luckmann developing the idea. So this has been used by various thinkers, but Habermas, who's a Frankfurt School philosopher, he's used it in particularly interesting ways. I've got a definition from him. Look at this: a culturally transmitted and linguistically organized stock of interpretive patterns. So it's how we understand in the world, how we communicate in the world. The life world is everywhere in our informal community lives. It's all around me. You know, the elder person next door is struggling to get out of the flat, so I might take her out or I might go shopping for her. These are life world interactions. My other neighbor meets up with me and invites me for a beer. This is action in the life world. In fact, we can say that what we have in the life world is transparent communicative action. And I've got Habermas's famous text here, which has that in the title. This is the theory of communicative action. This is a 1980s project here. Now, Habermas, he contrasts this communicative action with the instrumental action of the system. And when he talks about the system, he means, well, basically power and money. But in particular, for our social workers, we've got social legislation, we've got the state administration, we've got bureaucracy, we've got institutions. And Habermas's theory is that that could be threatening for the life world. So he warns of this danger for colonization of the life world by the system. So our bureaucracy could be stifling the health of the life world. It's a very, very interesting idea. And this idea of a colonization of the life world, again, it became a dominant discourse in Germany in the 1980s. And I think it was Habermas's usage which inspired Tiersch to pick up that life world idea. Beforehand, Tiersch had been talking about an everyday orientation, using ideas from a Marxist philosopher called Kosik from the Czech Republic, but he adapted this and it turned into a life world orientation in the subsequent decades. Again, there's literature on this in English, so Tiersch has been translated, Tiersch and Grunwald, and this is maybe a nice place to close my presentation. They've got 5 maxims for life world-oriented social work, and these really are so frequently cited in Germany that students would pick them up in the course of their studies. The first is prevention, establishing and consolidating a robust infrastructure of supportive services, and cultivating general life coping skills. 2, an everyday orientation on everyday relevance, placing accessible low threshold and holistic social care in the service user's life world. 3 is what he calls decentralization or regionalization, the everyday, the actual living space as it is experienced, this social environment, and not the specialization of the services itself. That's the basis for the planning. So we really start from the social environment. It's not so much a person in environment model, rather it starts with the environment and sees what kind of people that makes. 4, we've got integration, we've got social integration, social cohesion, social inclusion. And 5, we've got participation, involvement, co-determination, collaborative planning. Again, we're back to that democracy thread. That's been a key theme in our session today, hasn't it? So, this is an example of a German approach. It's a theory, but as you can see, it's very practice-based. And as I mentioned, social work students will be quite comfortable with this idea, and it really is a dominant theory today. So, thoroughly recommended literature. And you can see we're kind of now at the end of the presentation, and we can come back to that first question, the first question that Mel asked. What is interesting, what's special, what's particular about community in German social work? And that really would be my conclusion. You've got this theory that is incredibly powerful, and you've got this interesting social space idea or a spatial paradigm. If we take that as being the basis of German social work today, what you see is that community work is not a method in Germany. It's rather the actual heart of German social work. It's the core, it's the center. It really is the soul of German social work, if you like. So there you are, community not as a method, community is a kind of paradigm within German practice. And that point actually takes me to the end. This is the end of our slides. And this is the literature that I promised for you if you want to read more.
Yes, I was about to ask you for that. And surprisingly, I can see some similarities with Latin American discussions, especially Frankfurt School, of course. And well, in the first place, thank you, Magnus. It has been very clear and pedagogical for us. And I have some questions from the audience to share with you. Maybe I can share with you the whole thing, and then you can comment on that.
Yeah, now I can't see anything. Shall I leave my presentation? I think this is a technical question. Should I press exit escape on my computer now so I can see your screen?
Whatever you want. I think
Yeah.
you can stop sharing, and that's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Here we are.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And we have two or three questions from the audience. And then I have one more if we have time. The first one refers to, maybe you know about this, of course, at the Brazilian context. And it's not only about Brazil, but also for all Latin American countries. An important figure in social pedagogy, that is the educator Paulo Freire, of course, you know about him. And the question is if the work of Paulo Freire is recognized in the context within the field of social work in Germany. That is the first one. Another one, yes.
Shall we answer that straight away because it's such a lovely question?
Okay. You prefer to ask one by one.
Perhaps because it's so wonderful, and when you mentioned that, you know, that was something that I was immediately excited about. I mean, a short answer is yeah, absolutely. So again, you know, I've got my Hans Tiersch book here, and you'll find Freire referenced in there. So that idea of popular education, and again, very much in fitting with those critical traditions. Also based on democracy, promoting participation. So, I mean, it's coming from exactly the same place, isn't it? Absolutely. So, yeah, that was influential in Germany as well. People were well aware of those similarities. And I think actually it was really quite influential pretty much everywhere. Yeah, and it's exciting, isn't it? And I still dip into those books today. Yeah, and also as you started off by saying, you've got Latin American ideas of community perspectives. It makes those particularly interesting. Yeah, it's a nice illustration of what can be done. So yeah, an enthusiastic absolutely as an answer to that first question.
It's nice to find some points of discussion for future discussions between us. Not discussions, but dialogues, I mean, that can be fruitful between different traditions. And I mean, we know that the contexts are different, the histories, the genealogies, everything. But still, we have some points to establish dialogues.
Yeah, I mean, and again, just continuing with that idea, I'm asking myself, maybe there's even a connection with the earlier social pedagogy ideas, because you also had this philosophy of the person in their collectivity, the person in their social environment, in their community, and the idea that social work is actually education. I quite like that idea. You know, that's the essence of social pedagogy. And that's quite an exotic idea for the Brits or the Americans, you know, but it's quite natural to Germans and quite natural in that region of Latin America for that reason. So I like the education link there as well.
Yes, and I don't know, now I need the help of my colleagues, maybe Andres or Juan or whoever is there, because I know that I noticed some similarities, but I don't know it deeper with social education in Spain. That is another profession different than social work. There's not I don't know, a peaceful coexistence always between those professions. And I think there are similarities between that, between social pedagogy in Germany in the way you explained, and social education in Spain as a different profession. I think that there are similarities, but also differences between those trajectories.
Yeah, I mean, and this is maybe a nice chance for me to give another reference. There's a German thinker who's been based in the UK and Ireland called Walter Lorenz. So Walter's like Walter, and Lorenz is like a German version of that. And he talked about this at length, and he said it's dangerous to talk about social work. You know, we're using that English language term, but actually we have a whole cluster of social professions. And sometimes you can find, you know, approximate equivalences. You know, maybe social education in Spain is a bit like social pedagogy in Germany, but sometimes even that is difficult, you know, because they are so different, and each one has its own definition, its own particular tasks, its own particular theories. So it's a lovely reminder of the diversity of the social professions.
Can
And
I say something,
yes, yes,
Melissa?
of course,
Well,
of course.
I think this duality, we can say dual situation between the individual perspective and the community perspective, started at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th. Science in that moment was performed mainly by the Germans. That's correct, I think.
Yeah.
And also by the British. And from Germany in social sciences with a more continental, a more communitarian vision, and in the islands, in the Great Britain, with a more individualistic perspective. When you analyze the beginning of the of social work, that is a British and American invention, it's not a German invention, but at the beginning you note the impact of the Germans going as immigrants to the United States. And the progressive people are there with a lot of influence from Austria and German traditions. But at the end, the individual perspective was more strong in terms of power to spread this vision, the United Nations spreading social professions. And in the 50s, social workers were able in the United States to offer a professional place for many people in the social field. So community workers, social workers, well, during the 20s, the 30s, and we have to think that these social professions were feminine professions, female professions. And so these women looking for a profession found in social work a place for professionalization. But the problem was that social work was very individualist, sorry for the word, very individual orientated. And in the 50s, I don't remember exactly the year, the American Association of Social Work decided to quit the group and the community sections to impose only a kind of global thinking in social work that was very individual. But now, when the end of social work, the failure of social work, of the individual social work to give us good answers to solve social problems, we are now looking again to this communitarian, to these more social perspectives. I don't know, I'm sorry for being so long, but and here we have a big discussion in Spain between social education and social work. Social work succeed in order to become a profession, a recognized profession, and also to have first university status. And social education is the result of a late process where non-university people try to come to arrive to the university to have this kind of status, and they were associated with people from the educational field instead of the social work. And it's a pity. It is a pity now because we are different departments, different faculties, and maybe we need to think in joining again. But I don't know, because there are many political issues there that make this very difficult.
And as some of you may know, in Germany, at one point we had social work and social pedagogy as separate professions, parallel to one another. And in the course of the 1980s, they merged. They quite literally became one new profession. We had to create a new word for it. But before that point, there was the same kind of battle, the fight for status, the fight for recognition. Sometimes it was a bit like a zero-sum game that, each profession was almost trying to promote themselves above the other. So yeah, a totally fascinating discussion. And I also agreed with your analysis earlier of the migration of social workers, the migration of ideas. Absolutely, isn't that fascinating? So many social workers from Germany ended up in America. Sometimes they even came back to Germany to bring those ideas back. So you had this wonderful hybrid German-American thinking. It goes without saying, if you go back to the 30s, the women migrating found it quite exciting because I think America was a more fun place for a female scholar to be compared to Germany. So people like Alice Salomon were quite excited about the freedoms that women had and the respect with which women were treated. So maybe that was a gain, but the individualistic approach to social work kind of was glued onto that. So it was, a complicated discourse.
Good.
Yes, I have one more question from the audience. I will share it with you. Regarding Frankfurt School. I know that this is where to happen. The question is, in the academic context of the Frankfurt School and social pedagogy, how can we bridge the gap between seemingly abstract concepts and their practical implementation in social actions? What strategies exist to translate theoretical ideas into impactful practices within our communities? That's the question. A very simple one, isn't it?
I mean, again, this is a huge question, isn't it? This could be the concept for a future lecture. I can certainly talk about two different possibilities. I think in the 1960s, it was very much the spirit of the movement, the spirit of the thinking of the Frankfurt School that affected social work. And that idea, I think maybe it's a German thing as well, because of Germany's difficult past, the idea of democracy and promoting democratic structures, and really making the most of the energy of social movements in society. And we even had, as I mentioned at the beginning, we had different social movements to those in other countries. For example, we had a children's home, kind of a residential childcare reform movement. So it's a protest movement about the low standards in residential childcare. And that protest movement was supported by social workers. And over the course of a generation, bit by bit, we really professionalized our residential childcare. That anecdote suggests that one path to use that critical theory is I don't want to say conservative, but it's kind of like it's a liberal social reform. You've got quite radical ideas. If you have a welfare state, you can use those radical ideas to push your mainstream ideas forwards. And that maybe characterizes German social work. It's a strange mixture of critical social work or more conservative liberal reform. Yes, sometimes it's not as radical as you might think, given that you have this critical theory heritage, but ultimately they're quite good at mainstreaming radical ideas. So that would be, again, my British-German comparison. In Britain, you get radical social work, which is quite antagonistic of mainstream arrangements. And in Germany, it's the opposite. The radical stuff, sooner or later, influences everyday mainstream practice. you can ask yourself, is that good or bad? Is that also a form of colonization? We could talk about this, but I quite like it. So although I love the critical approaches, part of me, it also has sympathy with that social reform idea. And I'm proud of Germany's social work, and I'm proud of how much of it there is, the support that's given to families, prevention. So interesting paths, not expected paths. Yeah, something quite radical can have, a liberal social reform effect.
Thank you. I think it's a good answer. And before finishing this session, if you want to comment or share with us some additional information about Bechta University, your training offers, the summer school, and this stuff, it would be great.
Yeah, that's a lovely invitation. I'll do that. So basically, I've mentioned about myself. I'm a British German teaching in Germany. What do I teach? I do lots of international projects, and it's nice that Mel's given me a chance to talk about this, because you really are welcome on these programs, particularly if you're a Madrid student, but also if you're from another university. Send me an email. You'll find my email address as a public one. Get in contact with me. I do a whole bunch of international programs, and we're always keen to add new partners and new friends to these. I have what we Europeans call blended intensive programs, which is when people come for a week or two to learn together. And I have Spanish students in some of these modules already. And I also do a digital course. It's an online course. Many of the students on it get credits accredited for their studies back at their home universities. It's 100% online, and that's in May every year. And Mel's a guest speaker on that this year. So again, if you want any more information about this, just speak to myself or send an email to Mel, and maybe we can arrange your participation. I would be delighted to welcome you digitally or in person in Vechta. Yeah, and maybe it's a nice chance for me to also say thanks so much for this opportunity. This was an experiment today, technically with our subtitles in terms of the format. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope the subtitles haven't let me down. I hope the subtitles have been good enough to enjoy. And again, thanks for all the technical support. We had a bit of technical trickery to get us online, but it seems to have worked. I'm happy. I hope you are, guys. Many thanks.
Yes, we are. Once again, thank you very much, Magnus, for sharing your insights and for your patience and your disposition to do that. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And I don't know if Andres wants to say something else.
Yes, to say thank you. Next time, I hope to have you here in face-to-face in Madrid. And it has been a very enriching presentation. I learned a lot, and I think all the people watching YouTube did the same. So thank you very much, Magnum.
Hey, I'm looking forward to the next time already. Yeah, and again, I can really echo that sentiment. Looking forward to meeting you in person or once again online. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And coming back to Spanish, esperamos que puedan sumarse a nuestros próximos seminarios. Síganos en las redes sociales para eso, que lo vamos a estar comunicando. Mejorando este experimento que hemos comenzado hoy con el aperitivo de GrupoLab. Creo y seguro que mis compañeros piensan lo mismo, que ha sido un muy buen comienzo. Hemos tenido un invitado de lujo para eso, y espero que lo hayan disfrutado y lo disfrutemos a futuro en compartir el link del video y poder seguir utilizando estos materiales que también tienen la intención de ir generando diálogos entre distintas tradiciones, contextos, miradas, y esa es un poco nuestra apuesta. Así que nos encontramos en nuestro próximo aperitivo que comunicaremos en nuestras redes. Gracias a todos y todas por el apoyo. And thank you, Magnus, again. I hope to see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.